Hello everybody, I am Cassidy, I am the Hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be a part of the conversation. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons. You guys inspire me and allow me to do the work that I do, so thank you so much. I am really excited to share this conversation that I had with Elisabeth Sharp McKetta and discuss the intersection between aesthetics and spirituality and creativity. Today we are going to be focusing mostly on minimalism and how it can enhance your life. I'm not a minimalist myself. I very much appreciate Gothic type aesthetics, especially in churches. These dramatic images portray stories of life and death, the struggle between good and evil, and convey theological ideas to people when many were illiterate. Minimalism, on the contrary, encourages focus on the written word. Minimalism gets to the point, politely avoiding the unnecessary distractions of life. While many people prefer ornate churches, there are many who prefer minimalist churches because they appear more modest and get to the point. While minimalism might be a newer concept in Catholicism, it has been embraced by many other spiritualities, including the Quakers. Quaker meeting houses are simple, unadorned buildings, focusing on the simplicity of prayer. I think that both minimalist and maximalist aesthetics feed our spiritualities in different ways. They encourage us in their own ways to contemplate life, death, love, and rebirth. So without further ado, let's get into our interview. Hello everybody, I am Cassidy, I'm the Hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to you heard the conversation. I am here with the lovely Elisabeth Sharp McKetta, and she is a professor and an author and just an all-around really interesting creative person, and I'm really excited to be interviewing her on this channel.
And hello, lovely Cassidy. It's so nice to be here. And hello to the listeners. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat. And I've so enjoyed our conversations about writing over the last season. So a little bit about me is I teach. I've been teaching writing for over half my lifetime, which is a strange and wild fact. And came suddenly. But I love it, and I love talking with writers, and I love being part of the creation of projects, both as a mentor and as a collaborator. And I've been writing books for most of my adulthood, publishing them since my daughter was born when I was about 30. So motherhood and writerhood have always been sort of inextricably linked. And I don't really know how to write unless I'm writing in sort of short pockets of time. That might be something that taps into some of our conversations about ritual and spiritual practice, because I think of writing in very much a way that is a practice, and is a practice that has to be done in a pretty busy life. And I've put out 13 books, and I'm working on a few more in all genres. So that is, I sort of write where the energy is and where I'm interested and feel there's the most room to grow. So that's a bit of a bio.
Thank you so much, and that is such an accomplishment, like writing 13 books and being a mother. And I don't have any kids, but I definitely feel that when you're creating some sort of creative project, like I feel like there's a lot of overlap between creativity and motherhood. And like I think Sophocles said this, of like that he wasn't the creator of knowledge, but like the midwife of knowledge, of that he helped like bring it into the world. I don't know, there's I don't know, coinciding symbolism, I think there. I wanted to ask you about one of your books. What inspired you to write Edit Your Life?
I would love to answer the question about edit your life, but first I would love to share a little bit about a book before that, which really taps into what you said about midwifery. My first novel was about a midwife, and about it was a coming of age story about a young midwife, and the metaphors of how we carry each other across difficult eras and help each other become the people we need to be, and midwife each other's becomings is a topic that is very dear to my heart, and one that I really think at the end of the day feels central to writing for me. The question about any, I think, project is how do we become? How does this person become in memoir fiction? How did we get from here to here? So to your question about Edit Your Life, it was a book that was published in 2022 about how our family came to be what we call shed dwellers. We moved into a tiny backyard mother-in-law house that was built as my office because we were feeling, I think a way to put it that might speak to the issues you take on in this podcast is I think we felt very spiritually cluttered. We felt far from our ideals as parents and spouses and workers, and for me, as a creator. And it seemed that we needed to lighten the way that we lived in a lot of ways. And so we did what you mentioned, Sophocles. We did what many philosophers have done. We did what many writers have done. We did what many people have done, which is to downsize considerably. And we ended up moving into about 300 square feet, which was, I think, shocking to many of our friends in America, where that is, very, 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 very small. And we got asked all sorts of questions like, have you heard of moderation? And you must either be going bankrupt or getting divorced, which is it? But it was none of that. We really just wanted to have more focus on the things that matter, and less distraction by the things that didn't matter so much. So Edit Your Life is a story of that journey to hone in on the lives that mattered, which have always been, as a parent, as a friend, as a partner, as a writer, as a teacher. How can I best support those? And the answer is through living very simply in every way that I possibly can, so that my energy is freed up to be here now. And Edit Your Life began as a memoir, but was midwifed through the very wise feedback of my agents into becoming more of a guidebook, of a lifestyle book. So it ended up becoming sort of a course in a number of steps, in 8 steps, how anyone can think more clearly about what is important to them, and use the principles of editing, of asking, what is this? What is it trying to be? What is getting in the way of that? To think about how we might shape our lives more deliberately in ways big and small, while living them forward.
That is so beautiful, and I think that there's something that is really, really interesting about how that's something that we see throughout time, that philosophers and creatives will like find a cabin in the woods or find like some place where you can kind of recalibrate and like figure out like what needs to be here, what doesn't need to be here. um I think something I always dread, I think everybody always dreads this, but like I've been cleaning out like my family and I, we've been cleaning out our like family basement and going through all these different things. And I'm I learned kind of recently that I guess across spiritual paths and everything, that like the act of cleaning is like a spiritual practice, and that like there's even some people that believe that if you have too much clutter around, that can invite like negativity in. And I just find that to be really interesting. Especially like I've gone through many periods of time where like everything in my room just looks like there was an explosion. and and then I'm just like, why can't I write in here? So I guess kind of realizing like, okay, two things that have helped me was like, okay, make like your writing space like a place you actually want to be in, and like just start going on some walks and stuff and like calm down. um
Yes.
but
Walk is the solution.
yeah. um so do you think writing can be a form of mindfulness, and how do you find mindfulness practices?
Yes, this is a wonderful question, and I absolutely think writing is a form of mindfulness, and it certainly is for me, and it is for many of my students. I am a much more present friend, partner, parent, and also dweller in the world. I pay attention to beauty in a much greater way when I'm in a writing practice. So absolutely, it is my primary form of spirituality. And I want to touch back on what you said about the cleaning as spiritual practice. I think that is so fascinating. And it is one of those interesting sort of intersections between kind of healthy life and kind of spiritual hygiene, if we can call it that. I'm always interested when those things intersect. For example, so many religions have practices of fasting, which now, if you look on Helpline or anywhere, it's sort of like this hip optimization, like how do we, prevent cancer? Like, so there are always these sort of interesting intersections, I think, between the practical and the spiritual. And one thing that has has interested me recently is how so many spiritual practices seem to all have different ways of reckoning with the fact of our mortality. It seems like that's kind of a major job of any spiritual discipline is dealing with our mortality. And it feels like a very practical fact of our mortality is that somebody has to clean up our body and our belongings after we die. And this idea of accepting death, having a good death, preparing for death in a way that is reasonable and sort of um, I don't know, organized, the organized mind. It seems like the kind of mortality aspect and the cleaning as a spiritual discipline seem very much aligned, I think.
No, I think that that's such an important point that you made because I guess one of the I guess aesthetics that I'm drawn to is I'm very interested in like the gothic kind of architecture and the gothic kind of literature and that kind of thing, and it's like um all of that has to do with you're kind of just viewing it as a mere mortal, and then all of these artistic depictions are like angels and demons and people dying and people being like figuring out, are they going to be a saint somehow, or are they going to be, and it's just that's like so fascinating, and it's interesting how I think every culture and every I think throughout time I think has had to wrestle with like what is the good death, what happens to us, what happens to the things that we own, like what happens. And I think that one of the practices that I've found to be I guess healing for my family has been, it's a practice called Swedish death cleaning. And that's when the person is still alive, or if there's something that you want to make sure that somebody gets it, and they want you want them to know that you want them to have it, give it to them while you're still here. And it might be morbid for a lot of people, I think, to think about that kind of thing or to even confront it, but it's going to provide a lot of healing for you and also for your loved ones, so that they can know that that you intended for them to have these things.
Yeah, this is huge, and I love the idea of having those conversations more openly. And I think that one of the things that has been, I think, a real souvenir, sort of an emotional souvenir for me of studying fairy tales, which I've done for the better part of now 25 years, is that they deal with the sort of what I think of as the kind of trinity of basic, you know, enormous rituals that most people go through some form of, which is birth, love, and death. We are all obviously born. We connect to or love something or someone, often many times throughout our life, and we all die. And those happen cyclically, those happen metaphorically, those happen physically. But in fairy tales, you sort of can't avoid death, whether it's, death in the woods, death by a beast, death by a over stepmother. There's always sort of and I told my children lots of fairy tales, and I think it kind of de-tabooed these very ordinary things that are really scary when we keep them behind closed doors, because they're always world shakers. Like tell someone who's in love, like, oh no, this is something small. Like, of course not. Tell someone who's facing their own death, like, no, no, everyone does it. Like, of course not. It's yours. It's huge. It's the biggest event in your life. But all of these events, when are so personal because they're us, but they're also such human fabric ones. But yeah, it is funny because my children have sort of knocked through some of those taboos. And at one point, my daughter and I were arguing over minimalism because she identifies as a maximalist and loves having lots of stuff everywhere. And the older I get, want less and less and less. And she was saying, Mom, I'm going to be so annoyed if you die and leave me like one black dress, which like is probably highly likely.
No, like I think that like my aunt is a minimalist and I identify as a maximalist, and I definitely appreciate minimalism because I think that there's just less to keep track of and there's less that you have to like coordinate. I think I love antiquing and I love thrifting, and one of the things I've learned is like if I thrift too much and I need to like keep in mind the other things I've already thrifted, otherwise I may as well just open up my own thrift shop because nothing is going together and nothing is coordinating. And I'm just like, okay, the pieces are good. I need to get them to work together. And that's so hard to do. So, um, you talked about this a little bit, but like how do aesthetics impact your life and your writing process?
I think exactly the way that you just said, that it's easier to keep track of things when there are fewer things to keep track of. And um and I think that in itself is really everything. I think it's that full stop. My husband and I, before moving to the shed, the tiny house, had systems upon systems to try to feel on top of things. You know, the dinner plan, the childcare plan, the money plan, the everything plan. And it was such a revelation to move to a smaller house with less to clean, um, you know, no real household expenses because we couldn't buy anything. And it was, I mean, it was all of a sudden the sort of stresses of sort of time, cleaning, money just all went away. And all of a sudden we realized we didn't need our systems anymore because life was right there in front of us and we didn't need to kind of organize it in these theoretical ways. We just needed to kind of do what was in front of us to the best of our ability and get on with the day. And it is really, and I think that really is the sort of philosophically and physically, my aesthetic is to have in front of me only what is meaningful, beautiful, current with my interest in who I am today, the self that can fit into this room today, and let the others go, kind of like a permanent Swedish death cleaning of, I don't, this book is done. This necklace can go on, whatever it happens to be.
No, and I think that that's beautiful, and I think that one of the things that I've been learning, my grandma and I, we've been kind of just like decluttering things and stuff, and one of the things that she did was she put some like golf clubs on the curb and was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with these golf clubs, just put them on the curb. And then this adorable family came and they're like, we want these, and they took them, and my grandma was like, now they get to live a second life, that now it just keeps continuing going. And I love that. There was something that was like really beautiful about witnessing that. I think that one of the hardest things, I think, though, is like trying to figure out what are the things that need to be let go and what are the things that you want to keep a little longer. So I guess like what is the hardest part of editing your life in your opinion?
I think that the hardest part for most people is is looking clearly at what are the facts of our lives. Sort of what we've been talking about and around with something like mortality. The more we avoid something, the scarier or less kind of faceable it becomes. And I think that's very much the case with how we live. That when things feel overwhelming, it's easy to try to escape from it, whatever that escape will be, through something that just helps us tune out from an uncomfortable feeling or an uncomfortable truth or a necessary change that we're not quite sure we're ready for, or a decision that feels like too much sacrifice is involved. Like either way forward, something is lost that we don't want to lose. And I think that all of those are questions that come onto our desk when we edit a life, also when we edit a book. But any sort of choice forward has to look clearly at what is right there. and not be afraid of the answers. And I would say that everything, once those questions have been posed, I think becomes a lot less frightening. But I think that many of us, and certainly I have fallen into this, have procrastinated asking those questions out of fear of the answers for a long time. So I'd say that step one, if anyone is interested in making a change, is to ask honestly and listen for the true answers and accept the true answers. What is this life made of? What are its joys? What are its sorrows? What are its boundaries? Where are the energy sources? And what is it now? And what is it in its heart of hearts hoping to be?
No, that was a lovely answer. Thank you. Yeah, because I think that one of the things that I've personally struggled with, I feel like that ever since I was a kid, I've always been more interested in the past than in the future. Through different phases of my life, I've kind of tried to like, well, this is a good thing. I want to keep it exactly the way it is and to keep it going for as long as I could keep it going, but that's not possible, and over time it starts to deteriorate or it starts to change, or even wanting to preserve it stunts it and inadvertently kills it sometimes. And one of the things that I've learned just studying different histories and religions and stuff is that everything is a reconstruction. Everything that any ritual we're doing, any attempt to look back at people's lives, we are always reconstructing things. So in that sense, we are always creating something new. And in that sense, the past and what we're holding on to, it's already gone. It's an ineffable, unattainable thing already as it is. When I've kind of confronted that, that's kind of letting me realize, like, okay, I can let that go because it's already gone. It's already gone. Like, you're holding on to something that's not even in the present reality anymore. So yeah, I definitely resonate with everything that you said. You talked about this a little bit, but what can fairy tales teach us about the meaning of our lives?
Oh, this is a good question. And what you have said, I think, is so wise about change and might be a lovely segue into one of the wisdoms of fairy tales, which is that everything changes, but we always come back home, whatever home means, back to the self, back to the people who love us, back to what feels important to us, but that everything changes. It seems all fairy tales exist on the continuum of coming of age. Someone starts out innocent, ends up a little wiser. Someone starts out a doormat, think of any Cinderella, ends up with a sense of self and value. Sort of pick your arc. Someone starts, poor and scared, ends up filled with gold at the top of the beanstalk, whatever it is, but so much about change. And I do think change is quite scary. And that what you say about the rituals and the reconstructions, I think is incredibly wise. And I think also maybe is a lovely paradigm for thinking about why telling stories again and again, which is really what a fairy tale is a story that has so many centuries of fingerprints on it that we don't know who it belongs to anymore. It belongs to everybody. And so I think that there's really I think what writers can learn from fairy tales is that there's nothing new under the sun. We're telling the same stories that human hearts have beaten to forever, and that we make things new by putting our fingerprints on them, by making them personal, using the images and the voices and the details that are significant to us, and telling a meaningful story, even if it is similar in the bone structure to many, many, many meaningful stories that have affected us as humans.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you resonated with what I said. I'm moved but also intimidated by the idea of there being nothing new under the sun. Because it's simultaneously you simultaneously have to ask yourself, like, what new can be said about these things, but also there's always some new perspective that needs to be shared. That's humbling. It's also really exciting. How do we make the most of our circumstances and prioritize time for contemplation? And what are your favorite meditations and practices that speak to you?
This is such an important question, and it is an ongoing one. So I'll be eager to hear the same from you because I'm always curious and I always love to learn from people along the way. But I feel there was one thing you said that I wanted to touch back to, um, and it's the nothing new under the sun. That I think you're right. It is sad and comforting, but I think that it is important that for us to, I guess it sort of offers two gifts, I think, at least. One of them is that old ideas, like minimalism is such an old idea. It had been around before the Stoics. It's so old. But each generation is grateful for a new perspective, as you say, a new way in that speaks to the challenges of our age. And how they were different from each other age beforehand. So I imagine that probably most worthwhile stories or philosophies will come around and around and around and always feel a little bit new because we as humans only, we get this little lifetime. And of course we need to throughout it feel that we're changing and moving and discovering and encountering these things in a way that excites us and that we want to rise to. So I agree. I think it is both of those things. It is a source of both despair and hope, and I think that will get even more so as AI sort of becomes more of a storyteller. That's a whole other conversation. But I think that once again, you know, the product of a story will become less and less. Will become easier and easier to produce. But the fingerprints of Cassidy Bean, the fingerprints of Elisabeth McKetta, the perspectives and wishes and fears and images that are meaningful of each person listening to this are never to be replicated, ever. So we take those, wherever we go and whichever stories we tell. So to your question about practices, for me, there are really two kind of guiding forces that I try to let inform everything I do, and they are creativity and kindness. And that's the sort of as much as I have in terms of a faith. But I feel like if I'm believing in those and believing that those are important and that those are worth giving my all to, that I'm serving the world well and serving myself well and the individuals that I love most well. And so all of my practices have to do with finding ways to make those um, I was about to say systematic, but I don't think that's the right word. But to kind of, and I'm about to say ritualized, and I don't think that's it either, but to make them part of the daily rhythm of my life. So writing feels very much necessary to my contemplative life. What I have always a project on my desk. I try to finish one big book a year that is big, as in it challenges me and it takes and it grows me to sort of a new level of wisdom or understanding or something that feels kind of psychically. I've grown a psychic inch through it, and I always have a journal that is that I keep and have kept for years and years that I sort of rest on the page with most days, not every day. Some days it's, yesterday was a very long day because there were things that I was grappling with in terms of a writer and AI and where to put all these things. And other days it's very short. It's sort of here's a moment of beauty and move on. And other days it's nothing at all. Sometimes for whole months it's nothing at all. But it feels like the resting place, the prayer bench, the meditation pillow. It feels like the place I go when I need to kind of root at the beginning of the day. And so writing writing unattached to a project, writing just as a moment of sort of thinking, receiving, what Julia Cameron calls morning pages, but less formal. Just a moment to pause on the page is very important to me, and thinking about ways that I can regularly connect to my people. My grandfather, whose biography I wrote, was a chemical engineer, lived to 103, and it was fascinating studying his life because it was as big and beautiful and epic a life as anyone could ever imagine. And the things that he cared about, he found ways to to put in his everyday life in a way that in my 30s, when I wrote the book, I found so I felt were part of his spiritual practice, his that sort of made his life good. But I think as a younger person, I would have felt kind of horrified by the regularity and would have felt kind of bored by it. But for example, he wanted to um, connect with the students, so he put on his calendar, his old paper calendar, to call them every year on their birthday. So he had a practice of connecting to these people that he had taught maybe 60 years before on on his on his calendar. So every day began with work on his encyclopedia, which was his big ongoing writing project. And then he would have a morning game of cribbage with my grandmother. So he sort of even systematized love, which again would have horrified me at 20, but he was incredibly busy. She was incredibly busy. And this was their morning play. 20 minutes of this game that they played for like 70 years. Even the day she died, they had a game of cribbage. And then he would call the students for 3 hours. And so this idea of kind of putting in a daily structure, whether we call it a ritual, whether we call it a routine, but of kind of putting on in front of us the things that are important so that we see them every day and tend to them every day, I think is feels very much a part of what I see as a spiritual life. But I think it would not be complete for me, and I imagine for many writers, without some quiet, thoughtful time to sort of be in the space of my own mind and imaginings and feelings and see what is there. And now I want to fire that back at you. What about you?
It's such a lovely honor that you wrote that biography for your grandfather, and I am very inspired by the way that he structured his time around making time for the people in his life. That's so important because I think that especially as you get older, the way like time just gets kind of funny, and if you don't make time, the time just gets taken away from you before you're even able to have any time. So I guess for me with my contemplative practice, it's very similar to yours in a lot of ways, of that I do journal. I found an old journal of mine from when I was 12, and that was I was cringing. I was also just like, "Oh my god, this is just I'm so glad that I have this." It's like a form of self-archaeology in a
Yes.
sense. Um I've also been trying to go on walks. That's something that I've found to be very inspiring when I'm having moments of like blockage. And also I've been inspired by just like learning about how many people have gone on walks and having that as like a part of their writing ritual, or just as their like spiritual cleansing kind of a practice. Sometimes I personally will get guilty when I don't get as many things as I had like planned to get done in a day done, but I'm trying to get more comfortable at the idea of like sometimes it's okay to just leave a blank page, and sometimes that's just what the day is, and that's just what it is, and that's valid and human and beautiful too. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I'm going to leave all of Elizabeth's writing in the description box below. Yeah, thank you so much guys for watching. I'm Cassidy, I'm the hippie Catholic. God bless.